So how do you build connections with other feminist blogs and other communities?
It's a good question. This idea of how you get in front of people, when you walk into that ballroom, how you actually get into a pod of people who are talking about things that are always already going on, and how you build visibility. And I think that, one way, like I mentioned earlier, that we do it is by being smart with how we're using social media, so that we're, using the tips and tricks. We're using thinking about things like SEO optimization on the blog. But also, a big piece of this is figuring out where we can form a little bit better partnerships on campus. So one of the things we've been talking about is what are other student organizations that we might have some face-to-face interaction with, or conversations with behind the scenes, so that they will share the link to the blog. Can we get the blog link posted on our communication studies homepage? Can we get it on the women's studies information page? How do we leverage other faculty and student organizations so that there's both the online and face-to-face conversation to kind of build that visibility? Because I think that first piece of trying to figure out how you get an audience, how you get in front of people, is a challenge, and something you have to pay a lot of attention to, especially when you're first starting.
How do you deal with some of the backlash of being visible?
So initially, when I think about backlash of visibility for a blog, I think about trolling and really negative commenting, or people verbally attacking bloggers and stuff like that. And so there are definitely tools that we build in to the blog to regulate commenting. All of our bloggers have the individual autonomy to review and either approve or delete any comments on their post. And so posts that aren't generating what we would consider productive dialogue or conversation about issues, those don't hit the surface. And those we don't respond to or engage with. And I would say we haven't had a lot of overt pushback or backlash. I almost think what is a little harder to deal with are finding maybe that you're not getting support from other organizations on campus, from areas in your university, where people aren't, willing to promote the blog or let students come in and talk about it. Those kinds of issues are part of addressing a larger gender climate issue on campus. And I think what we've done is we've just kind of kept plugging away at it, and the more we can find spaces and organizations and allies to talk with and to help promote us, the better off we are.
So what do you think are we talked about backlash as a challenge, what do you think other challenges to consciousness raising online or just blogging in general?
If we think about this as what are our limitations to dialogic engagement or to digital consciousness raising, I think there's a lot of them. And I think one of them, like you said, is just that first one of getting in front of people. And also, a lot of the mechanisms by which we get in front of people, or we reach out and shake hands in the digital space, have limited opportunities for what we would really talk about as dialogue. So on Twitter, right, we have 140 characters.
Yeah.
So how much can you say in that space? How much of a conversation are you actually going to have? And I think one of the ideas is that we aren't trying to have conversations in just any one of these paths, but by spreading across them, by using Twitter, by using Facebook, by using the blog, which allows for much lengthier commenting and conversation. It's one way we try and have good conversation and get toward a more consciousness raising that has more depth. And so I think with the blog, we're sort of trying to balance a little that depth versus breadth, right? Just getting ideas out there and getting people exposed to things. but still having substance to it, in the space for, like you said, people to offer support or to offer a divergent opinion, right? That allows, a lot of times it's conflict in the comments or the blog that really allows for consciousness raising, right? For people to perhaps rethink a perspective that they've held, or to see things in a new way. Are there limitations that you see for consciousness raising in the digital space or via the blog?
I think one of the limitations is just the format of a blog. As the technology has increased, I feel like our attention span has decreased a little bit. So when you have lengthier blogs, or just, a lot of, when people see so many words written down on a screen, they're like, I don't know if I want to read all this. Like, I don't think I'm done, or ready to commit to that. I'll read it later. And then you never actually come back to the post. So I think that's one of the reasons we put like word limits, because we realize that not everyone's going to read, but it's difficult to get them even to read like 500 words sometimes. So I think that's a little bit of a challenge when it comes to blogging, versus when you're talking to someone, you're seeing someone's nonverbals, you're seeing them nodding their head and smiling or like giving you looks, and so you're interacting, which makes it a little bit more involved, which makes it a little bit more exciting. Some of the best things you have are like really heated discussions with your friends, not aggressive, but just like really passionate discussions. So you don't necessarily get that in the blog sphere. When you do, you have to wait a day or two for someone to respond back, because there's not that immediacy. Also, nonverbals aren't there, so things that sound okay, telling someone, because you can smile while you're saying it, doesn't necessarily come off as well when you're typing it. So you have to be really conscious of your tone throughout it. So I feel like those are major challenges to getting people involved, or they just don't think they have something to say, or they don't think they need to contribute to it. But when you're talking to someone, you can be like, no, I really value your opinion. Like, I want to know your ideas on this. So I think that's a challenge.
Yeah. One of the things we've talked a lot about, and we've had a number of students who've come to the blog who would say, well, I'm not a feminist, but I think these issues are important, or I'm all for equality for women, but I don't know how I feel about calling myself a feminist. And part of consciousness raising is trying to figure out what your feminism is and how you feel about feminist ideas and feminist activism. And I think, that in some ways the blog definitely privileges writing as a way of knowing. Right, writing sort of, I often talk about, for me, writing this stuff is I write my way in, right, to figuring out how I feel about something, and that process really works for me. And for other people, they've got to talk their way into it. And so, I think that the style of that as a way of learning about yourself and about others works better for some than for other people. And I also think we've had, some challenges with people sort of feeling like, am I feminist enough to have something to say in this space? And on the other hand, for, senior women's studies students who have a real strong sense of feminism, to look at other bloggers' posts and say, oh, that doesn't sound like feminism to me, or that's not my feminism. And I think there's something, just a little bit different about having those things on the page, and I think especially for new feminists, about trying to have the vulnerability of figuring out how they feel about something or where their feminism is. It's sort of a unique challenge of feminist blogging as consciousness raising.
I love that you bring up writing is knowing. When I first started the blog, I was just like, this is my feminism, and this is what I'm going to say about it. And the more I actually wrote and thought about my posts and engaged, the less sure I actually was about where lines were. And it's from like, everything's just gray. Most everything is just gray. So I feel like that's a challenge. But, being one of those stronger, I know where my feminist ideals typically lay, talking to someone who doesn't necessarily identify as a feminist. It's a great opportunity, I think, for both sides. It's a challenge, but it's something that can easily be worked through, so that hopefully by the end they don't necessarily have to be like a hardcore feminist, but they can at least be open to feminist ideals. And on the flip side, at least we can see a different perspective as to why someone isn't attaching themselves to feminism, but isn't necessarily against the ideals of it as well. But I think it's a different challenge.
Yeah.
At least with this, like, as a directed kind of project type of thing.
And I think it challenges students to really kind of sit with themselves and figure out where they are with an issue, because ultimately we're always trying to challenge students to get to, at the end you might still feel ambivalent about Beyonce's performance at the Grammys or something, but you will have articulated what about it feels right or empowering or feminist, and what about it feels more complicated, right? Or feels like it's not your feminism. And so being able to move out of, I think, where a lot of people sort of might be a little more comfortable with sort of a, well, it depends, or a, you could see it either way, which may be true, but into greater clarity, at least, about, well, what does it depend on?
Yeah.
Right? And, in what ways, right? What are the issues that we can really call to light, and then have really interesting and valuable conversations about, and what issues get at feminist ideals, and what we're trying to accomplish with figuring out what is, a modern feminist movement. What does it look like? How do we have productive conversations?